Well, welcome. That time of year is here again. The time where we start wondering about, I want to say 4,500 cherubs, but we'll find out if that number is going to increase again. And what they're facing, what our school system's facing, what our community is facing to support all the kids. So tonight we welcome the Grand Poobah of the schools. Why don't we start with an introduction?
Hi, Al. It's always a pleasure to be here. Kevin McIntyre, Superintendent of the Milford Public Schools, and we're getting ready next week to open our doors again for all of our students.
Now, what is the biggest challenge you face when you sit there and say, I'm going to open up 5 buildings?
Yeah, I think one of our challenges has been, and it's coming back. When I was on the show a couple of years ago, I said, geez, over the summer we're getting 100, 200, 300 students enrolling, and we're kind of back to those numbers again. So during the pandemic, Milford was very similar to a lot of districts across the state and the country where the enrollment declined, which was, if you followed it, the trajectory has kind of been like this the last 5 to 7 years. And last year our enrollment went down. Well, we're climbing back up again. So we're not gonna be quite where we were pre-pandemic, which was over 4,500 students to start the year. But we're gonna get there before too long, probably by like October, November, December. Wow. Depending on kind of number
Well, I
of
remember
variables.
you came to the FinCom and you looked over at me when you said, I know somebody's been saying for years we've only added 1 student per year.
Right.
Because for 40 years, I graduated in 74 with 222.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago it was 260, so it was 1 child per year. And then all of a sudden,
yeah, we kind of exploded the last I'd say probably 7 or 8 years. We've really seen, again, except for the pandemic year, we've seen a steady increase in students.
But now if you have 300
Mm-hmm.
new kids,
Mm-hmm.
that's a new Brookside.
Correct, pretty close to it.
What do you do with?
So we're probably not gonna net 300 over the summer because we're gonna have a lot of students that leave or move out for various reasons, but we're probably gonna net, I would say, north of 100 students. But that's over 13 grade levels. So you're probably talking anywhere from like 8 to 15 kids in a particular grade level. Now our big bubble of students is at the high school now. So every kid we add to the high school is, it just adds pressure to the schedule, which is a very complicated animal.
But if it was one time, like when I was a kid, we had a bubble of 100 kids.
Mm-hmm.
School committee, variety of them went nuts. Oh my God, but then it came back down.
Mm-hmm.
I see 3 years, 4 years where you've been adding 150 plus.
Yeah, we were probably a little over 4,000 when I started. It was probably 4,068, give or take, and now we're probably around 4,500 again this year, 4,550, 4,600. So I think there's a number of challenges because one, it's unpredictable because it's not based on just birth rates. Because if you look at, I think the entire country, but particularly the Northeast, the birth rates are declining, the student populations are going down, and if you look at a lot of the school districts around us, their populations are steadily decreasing. And ours are increasing due to move-ins, and it's immigration on a lot of different levels, people coming from other communities within Massachusetts, from other states, and from other countries.
Well, it was a few days ago, my lunch paper is the Times.
Okay.
So I'm looking through the New York Times, and they're talking about how hot the real estate market is. Mm-hmm. And they said 2 out of the 3 hottest real estate markets are in New England. And I think it was like Peabody, and then the number 3 in the country was Milford.
Doesn't surprise me.
It did me. In the whole country?
It's, we were a very, I think, affordable community for Massachusetts, because Massachusetts, especially Eastern Massachusetts, real estate prices are sky high, and I think, people saw real value in the type of community Milford is, and the, I think all the services that you get when you move into, a community like Milford, and I think people get here, and, people fall in love with and they stay.
Well, when we look at the average house in Milford, it's about $5,200, $5,300 in taxes.
Mm-hmm.
That's good value, because towns around us, they have the designer trash bags. I remember when my daughter lived in Worcester, she showed me this little yellow bag for $3 a piece.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you're kidding me. That's called a fee. To me, it's called a tax.
Absolutely.
You're putting your hand in my pocket. And then riding the school bus became a privilege, and families had to pay $400 a kid.
I love the fact that we've maintained that, the school bus service is part of the whole kind of package that you get as part of the school system. And it's not there's no user fee connected to that.
Well, I remember when it came up, and people said, well, if you don't have to use it. And I laughed. I said, so just out of curiosity, if we're going to charge people for the school bus, if my house is on fire, back then it was TUI Rev 1, I said, is Bill going to call me and say, will that be Visa or MasterCard to roll my truck? To me, there's certain things
Absolutely.
that are just part of living here. You can say trash is a luxury, but show me a house that doesn't generate trash.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm very happy that we've been able to maintain that and I don't even want to call it a free service because it's part of the.
Well, you're paying for it, but
it's included within your residential tax rate.
now the kids coming in. Is there any demographic? I mean, is it immigrant kids? Is it moving kids? Are they migrating from Framingham and Worcester, or?
It's really a variety. We're seeing, our EL, English learner population has been increasing pretty steadily over the last 10 years. So particularly in the summer, we see a larger percentage of English learners. But if you look at like the entire school year, it's a big mix.
So it's no specific, because I always thought that a lot of people would see the value of being in Milford because the taxes are so low.
I think that's part of it. I think the quality of the schools. I think the quality of the services you receive from the town. There's great restaurants. There's walking trails. There's recreational opportunities. I think it's the whole package that really appeals to folks.
So if I'm looking for a house in Milford, and I run into you, and I say, will my child get a good education? My old question.
Yeah, and my answer was the same as it always was. It's absolutely. I think we provide a world-class education for our students. We have, tremendous programs. If you look at like the Milford High School on down, we have great STEM programming, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We have a robust advanced placement program, early college courses. We're offering, for the first time, STEM classes at the K2 level, so students will really engage.
Is that right?
Oh yeah, this is the first year. We've got two incredible women we just hired who are going to really engage and excite our students at a very early age, particularly around science, and it's going to be very hands-on, focused on good questions that the kids can really kind of dig their teeth into.
Well, that's exciting, and I apologize that this may sound sexist, but women going into science. I remember when my daughter took the math boards and did well on them, all these engineering schools started recruiting there. And I'm sitting there saying, if I look at scholarships and I have a daughter.
Absolutely, and we're seeing more and more of our female students, engaging in whether it's, chemistry, biology, physics, computers, technology. We have these great series of courses that are Project Lead the Way that are really one of the courses that starts out, you walk into the classroom on the first day and there's a tape outline of a body on the ground and they have to figure out, what happened. How did that person die? And you almost become like a forensic scientist.
That's fantastic. Because again, when I looked at scholarships, with the Connections program, the mentoring program that we've got going, a lot of the kids need help financially. I remember when Emily got accepted to Holy Cross, I looked at my darling bride and I said, should we be excited we just spent $250,000?
No, it's the cost of colleges are crazy. It's skyrocketing. One thing I'll say though is, our guidance department and our administrative team does a really nice job of connecting, the students to, what programs and opportunities are out there for students, because there's a lot of great programs. Like they have I'm gonna butcher the name of it, but it's like a 2+2 program where students kind of go to a community college for 2 years, and then if they hit a certain GPA, they get accepted to UMass Amherst.
Oh,
and
cool.
so they save the money for the first 2 years, and they still walk away with that UMass Amherst degree, which is becoming more prestigious every year.
It's funny because one of the alumni, Tony Chinapi,
Who's very involved in the program.
who was very,
Yeah.
and I always talked about, when I graduated school, we looked at UMass Amherst as a safety school.
Mm-hmm.
You
Which
know.
is not the case anymore.
Now all of a sudden, it's incredibly difficult to get in.
And the honors college there is very sought after by top students from all over the state and all over the country.
You know, and I think part of it was that the state finally said we're going to invest in the UMass program.
Mm-hmm.
But the other part is, I mean, if I've got to pay for school, private school, I mean, Holy Cross is over 70 grand a year. I mean, that's...
Which is outrageous, but right in line with other
But
private
it's
schools.
Northeastern, I mean, all the other schools
Yeah.
around. But you sit there and say, so it's going to cost me $300,000 to get a private school degree, and what, 100 and a half?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm
give or
not going to
take.
use the word only, because 150,000
But
is not an
the
only.
delta between the two is pretty significant.
But I could come out with a big chunk of my new house that
If
I
you-
could spend the money
Well,
on.
the other piece is if you're thinking of getting an MBA, a law degree, go to medical school, that's that's on top of it too. And so we always talk to students about like what's your long-term plan and what's the best way to get you there.
Again, better to go into chemistry. I just
Yeah.
found out, I mean, if you graduate and you go into a PhD program for chemistry, now you're a slave and you eat ramen noodles,
Right.
but they pay you 40 grand a year.
Mm-hmm.
So compared to paying 60 to go to some programs, getting 40, it's a nice alternative.
And that's part of the reason why we're putting such an emphasis on. And plus, this area of the state has, it's biotech, it's advanced manufacturing. So the other thing we're doing too is for some, a portion of our students who maybe aren't looking for that 4-year degree, we're trying to connect them to certificate programs where they can walk out and jump into like, an advanced manufacturing outfit and make, really, really good money. A few years ago, the average salary in advanced manufacturing was somewhere between 70 and 80,000.
I don't doubt it because, like we were talking before the show, I've got 2 positions open now for months. One is a senior chemist, 100 plus, and one is a very junior person. You're looking for somebody that's coming out of school with a year or so, maybe 2. That's going to be 60 grand. I mean, that's nice money.
Absolutely, and it's and the jobs are there in the science fields, and they're not getting filled quickly.
No, I mean, it's a killer. I mean, today, if you go into quality assurance, you're guaranteed. It's like going into nursing.
You got
You
a
know,
job for life.
You got a job for life because
Yeah.
you can't find them.
Yeah, and we're seeing that across the board, and we're seeing more and more employers reaching out to our high school students that maybe were reaching out to college students before.
I always ask the question, what are we doing for the kids who aren't academic superstars? I mean, when I went to Milford High, there was a pretty clean path coming out of 8th grade, where if you wanted to go to college, you went to Milford High. If you wanted to go into a trade, you went to BVT. And that was just the way it rolled. I don't know if it was accurate, but that was what we felt. Today, I mean, it feels like if you're not top 10% or 15% of the class, you're not getting into BVT. So what do we do for the kids? And I always bring up my father. My father was the most educated, uneducated person. Put him in an organic chemistry class, he would not do well when he came from Portugal. He had 4 years of school, but put a tool in that man's hands. He was Da Vinci. He was Michelangelo. He was unbelievable. And I worry that, are we doing enough for the kids like my father?
So a few things we're trying to do. One is we started a building trades program at the high school, and that's been very successful and very popular. So we've right now it's a 2-course sequence, and we've really done a nice job of connecting students to employers. And prior to the pandemic, we were really moving in a direction of internships, and hopefully we can get that back rolling this year. But really trying to connect students with, like, if they have a particular interest in, computers and, some kind of trade, or, maybe there's a great program at, Mass Bay Community College or Wachusett Community College or, in Worcester, and we can really connect them to, maybe a program where they take 3 or 4 classes and it sets them up for some kind of career that's really going to be of interest to them, and they're going to be able to get out and really make a good living pretty quickly.
You know, it's funny because 74, there were 3 of us that got banished from Milford High because we ran out of science courses.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, Uncle Paul Raftery, who to this day I can never speak higher of, pulled us into a room and said, okay, I've got you signed up for a biology and a chemistry course starting, you know, senior year. We looked at each other and said, no, there are none. We've got them all. He goes, Dean Junior College,
Mm-hmm.
you're signed up. And that really set me up to follow chemistry straight through.
So yeah, and so similarly, we've had, and I think that legacy lives on because we've had a group of students almost every year that I've been here in Milford that have kind of done a similar thing. They've exhausted the AP classes, and we've set them up in a college class or two where, and it's generally like the professor, they do it online now. They don't actually physically go there, but they're interacting with students on a college campus. They're engaging with really high level, generally, it's been either math or a high level science class, and it's gone really, really well.
Well, it amazes me because when I go back to school, when I go back to Holy Cross now, I couldn't get in. You know, when Emily, my youngest, was applying, she asked the Dean of Admissions, well, what do you consider good SAT scores?
Mm-hmm.
It was like top 10%.
Right, right.
And I was saying, my God, if that's good, I wouldn't have even qualified.
Well, the crazy thing is now is that the competitive, really competitive schools for admission have become hyper competitive. And then there's a group of schools that are very good colleges and universities that are really competing for students because, again, the student population nationally is shrinking. And, you know, they're competing for, you know, students internationally and locally. But, you know, the most competitive schools, it's unbelievably competitive.
Well, like I say, when I see the grades, because I've had interns from Holy Cross for maybe the last 8 or 9 years,
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2 every year. And they're coming out, and I look at their cum 3.8.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I never got a 3.8 as an overall. I was proud of my grades, but they weren't 3.8s, 3.9s.
A few gentlemen C's.
No, well, B's, but,
B's, okay.
But it was still middle 3s, not
Okay.
high 3s
Yep.
out of 4,
Yeah.
as my oldest daughter always reminds me.
Yeah, but you know, but again, like I think our students are getting into some of the most competitive colleges. We consistently send a lot of students to our, you know, state schools throughout New England, and we've got a number of students that we're really trying to position for success if they go directly into the workforce right after high school.
And again, it's changed so much because the prejudice we grew up with, well, if you go into a state school, you can't afford a private. That's not the case anymore. You're getting top 5% of the class saying, I'm not going to pay an extra $200,000 to get, you know, an education at a private school.
And a lot of kids are thinking ahead to grad school too, and they're saying it's not just going to be that undergrad expense, it's going to be the graduate expense too.
Yeah, for a lot of courses, one of my closest friends, when he explained to me to set up his own practice, he said, I'm $750,000 in debt, and I haven't earned a penny yet.
Right.
By the time he paid undergrad, medical school, set up his office, he said he was like $750,000 in
And you
debt.
can throw in malpractice insurance and
Oh,
a couple
God.
other things.
So now we're talking about adding kids. And where do you put them?
Well, eventually that's going to become very challenging. One of the things that we're doing, which we talked about a lot in the spring, is we submitted a statement of interest for a building project for Milford High School. And that's going to be, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because there's no guarantee that the MSBA is going to accept our application on the first, second, or even third time that we go through that process. The other thing we're doing too is we've added classrooms in almost every building over the last several years. So at Stacy this summer, we've actually taken a third of the library and turned it into 2 classrooms. At Milford High School, we've taken a lot of spaces and converted them to classrooms. We just, I don't know if you've been upstairs at the high school recently, but there's kind of like a bank of lockers. There was like an indent where you could go in.
Where there used to be Pinto Palace?
No, upstairs actually, right above that. And we've kind of closed that off and turned it into a classroom and pulled some of the lockers that were the middle bank out. So we've added probably like 6 or 7 classrooms at the high school in the last,
Wow.
I'd say 3 or 4 years. We've probably added 2 or 3 at the middle school. You know, Woodland's obviously brand new, and we've added a couple spaces at Brookside Memorial that we've kind of, you know, repurposed some of the space for classroom space.
Well, I mean, I've been criticized for saying we need to put money in stabilization because there's a school coming.
Right.
And, you know, I had a discussion with some people where they said, why are you always saying there's a school coming? I said, because there is. We have, what, 5 schools?
We do, yeah.
And you figure the average lifetime is 8 to 10 years between the schools? Say 40 to 50 years?
Yep. Yeah, I think if you talk about like just like the
Just
process.
in general.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Milford High was 74.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Woodland, you start going through it, and you get 40 to 50 years out of a school
Before you have to do something.
before you have to do something, renovate it, build new.
Right.
So 40 years divided by 5,
Yeah. you're talking-
every 8 years.
Yeah. And that's kind of where we're at. What we're seeing with Milford High School in particular is, like you said, it was built in the early 70s. So we're starting to see, like, you know, systems coming to the end of their natural life. The heating systems, the roof, the plumbing, you know, all those systems are, you know, Rob Quinn and his team does an incredible job of maintaining and, you know, keeping them up to speed, but eventually.
That guy was the mistake I made that I'm most proud of, that I was wrong. When we were interviewing him, I remember saying, we need to hire this guy, but I don't think he's going to last more than 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's going to become so valuable, somebody's going to steal him. And that was, what, 20 years ago?
I mean, he's been here, I think, more than 20 years, but he's been great, and he's been, you know, he's been critical in, like, all these processes, whether it's, you know, working through the Woodland Building Project or, you know, keeping our buildings up and running when, you know, there's been challenges.
Especially when we gave him no money and said, fix it anyway. Now, he's been, if I look at a poster child for the kind of employee that we want to hire and keep, his name's right there as a reference in the dictionary.
And I've talked to Rob at 4 in the morning and, you know, 11 at night, and these aren't one-offs. This is kind of consistent.
But he's the kind of guy that when he comes forward to, like, the Finance Committee, the Capital Committee, and Kevin, no taking away from you and Kathy, yeah, but when Rob says, we need it,
Absolutely.
it's like, oh, crap.
That's why when he's at the meeting, you know it's serious.
Yeah, it's like, it used to be like when Tom O'Laughlin used to show up for his budget meeting. He always had his gun. We always laughed with both Tuohys saying, guys, you need a better prop.
Maybe an axe. They could
Yeah,
bring
maybe an
in.
axe or something, but police chief always shows up with his gun.
Yep.
All the other meetings, he just shows up. But
Yeah, it's hard to say no to that.
you show up with your Quinn.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. He's the big gun when we need a big project done.
So now we talk about SBA.
Mm-hmm.
What is well, explain what an SBA is and what's the process.
Yeah, so the Massachusetts School Building Authority is the state governing board that kind of oversees school construction throughout the state of Massachusetts. And it kind of came into being after a couple of really big projects in, I think, Newton, Massachusetts. Actually.
Newton South.
Yeah. So they really kind of regulate almost every square foot. If you've ever been, you know, seen a meeting like connected to Woodland, everything is kind of, there's a formula connected to it, it's regulated. And the way the process works is if a community wants to get a project underway, whether it's a renovation, a new building, or a major like systems project, they have to get sign off both from like the select board as well as the school committee to start it. And then there's a whole application process that we go through. So we spent the spring putting the application process together, explaining basically why we need either a renovation or a new building at Milford High School. And there's really kind of 3 key factors. One is the systems are coming to the end of their useful life. 2, our population has shifted and the requirements of specialized programs have increased pretty dramatically over the last, what has it been, almost 50 years now? And 3 is we're seeing an increase in our student population. So those are really the 3 drivers of whether it's going to be a renovation or a new building.
Now that seems strange to me because renovation or new building, the student needs are the same, right?
100%.
I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're building new or renovating, because a renovation's going to cost.
I don't even want to throw the number out there. Potentially, what I've seen, you know, it's probably going to be double what Woodland was, even a renovation.
We're probably looking at 150 million. I know I get in trouble when they said we were going to decide whether we're renovating Woodland or building new.
Yeah.
I laughed and said, we'll do our due diligence, then we'll build new. Because you could see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine. I mean, you think of a new school. When Newton was in South,
Right.
hit $230 million, people thought they were buying Massachusetts.
Right. And that was a long time ago.
But today, when you look at a new school, we'd be all of 250 without blinking.
I think easily, particularly because the construction prices have been escalating the last few years. If you look at the Woodland project, Northbridge is doing a very similar. It's a K-6 building, but a similar size student population, and it's double the cost.
Really?
And they're I think they either open it this year or they're opening it next year. I can't remember.
Wow. So if we look at Milford High,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll agree with you that they probably don't use the most exciting feature we found. We had to wait for teachers to leave the room, was we could use that rotary phone on the wall
Right.
to call different rooms.
Right.
So there's certain technology that they probably don't use the rotary phones very
They
much.
haven't in a while.
But the bunker itself,
Mm-hmm.
boy, I got to believe that that is still as strong as when it was built.
The bones of the building are still pretty good. Where we need to kind of make significant upgrades is around like the roof, plumbing, heating, those kinds of systems. You know, the flooring, things like that. I mean, we've upgraded the technology obviously in the last 10 years a couple different times. But you know, the major systems like a roof project alone is a significant undertaking for a
We
building.
spent
the size
$4
of-
million on it before.
Yeah, I think it's probably 5 or 6 times. that
Well, I
now.
was going to say, realistically, that was 10, 12, well, 20 years ago.
20, yeah, probably a little over 20,
20
give or take 20 years ago.
And that was 4 or 5 million then.
Right, right.
And
So-
then you got your heat. I mean, remember the generator? When we had to put a generator in, we said, wait a minute, this one's going to be underwater. Maybe we should do some renovation here.
Right.
Yeah.
So I, where we would kind of really look at a renovation for the high school is because we have the pool area, which not a lot of high schools have anymore, and that's become something that's being used not just for Milford alone, but regionally for and even state meets. We use, the Milford High School pool. The auditorium, we've got a really nice and big auditorium, which we'd hate to lose. I think we'd lose a lot of square footage there
I think
too.
people don't understand that the SBA,
Mm-hmm.
what do they say? They'll pay for half the expenses?
There's a formula connected to it based
Yeah,
on a
but
lot of different factors.
We're going to pay for half, but oh, wait a minute, deduct this. It's like your taxes,
Correct.
where all of a sudden it's like put in the larger of the amount, right? And you sit there and say, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. Well, I
And
think
the
we get
pool is
40.
something that I don't believe is part of the reimbursement process.
I think it's zero reimbursed.
Yeah.
I remember when we went through Woodland, we had the gyrations of we wanted another auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the Davern Auditorium at the high school,
Right, which is fantastic.
which, thank God, I mean, how much we use it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we found out this SBA would pay zero. And Aldo and Jonathan came up with, what the heck, cafetorium.
Which is actually one of my least favorite words in the English language, but it's state of the art. Like the Woodland Cafetorium is state of the art, so they can do, live performances, musicals. They can show films, and it's a great
I made fun of Aldo and Jonathan for telling us about a cafetorium. It sounded like something that modern medicine should cure. But at the end of the day, we got a cafeteria, which we needed,
Absolutely.
and an auditorium, which is highly desirable.
And we bought, and I don't know how many people know this, but we bought cafeteria tables that actually fold out
In half,
and they
and-
become like benches for the auditorium version of the cafetorium.
But see, that, I don't think people really understand all the pieces that go into a decision, because the easiest thing is to say, let's just go buy a new high school. Then
Right.
you don't inherit any of the sins,
Right.
but you're talking $250 million.
And we'd probably lose a lot. We'd lose a lot of space. We'd lose a lot of the amenities that we've kind of grown to
You know, that's right,
expect.
because the SBA does that square foot per pupil.
Correct.
Problem is, I think the pupil they use is very, very small little people.
Exactly.
Because when they start saying how many square feet, we'd lose a significant portion of the square footage of our high school.
100%. We've got great square footage there, and if we can come close to maintaining that and just repurposing some of the space for, some of our differing needs, I think that's going to be the ideal solution.
And then you turn around and say, we could have a pool, we just have to pay dollar for dollar.
Correct.
So essentially it'd be, 60% more expensive because it would come out of Milford money.
Correct.
We could have an auditorium, but again, dollar for dollar, because the state would not help
We
us
get a
at
little.
all.
The high schools get a little reimbursement for auditoriums. It's
they
elementary
do?
schools that don't. Yeah.
I just remember Woodland, we would have gotten nothing.
Correct. Yeah. Anything I think. Middle schools I'm not sure about, but I know high schools they do give you reimbursement on it. I don't know if it's the full percentage or not, but they definitely reimburse at the high school level.
And
for
then you've got the
auditoriums.
whole problem of where do you put it? I mean, if you remember when we built Woodland, no, it was Brookside. It was Brookside that we had to build almost half a school,
Right.
expand Memorial, take over parts of the high school, because you had 300 kids that you had to put somewhere.
Correct.
What could we do with 1,200?
So, if it's a new building, it would depend on where we sited it. If you were able, kind of like Woodland, where you put it kind of
Next
in front
door.
of, yeah. If you do something like that, it might not be an issue, but I don't know. We don't know what kind of ledge is there. We'd have to explore all of that. If we did a renovation, we'd probably phase it in. So you'd probably have, you'd start with an A wing and build it up, move all the a portion of the students there, and renovate the old A wing. That sort of
That
thing.
would actually, in my mind, be a wonderful idea. It costs a little more because you got to phase it.
Mm-hmm.
But first of all, you think about where do we own enough land?
Particularly for a high school, which takes up the most, because you think athletic fields, think parking.
We'd be in Nebraska. It would be Asylum Street. Would be probably the only place that we own enough dirt.
You know what? There's a community, and I'm going to blank on the name of it. I think it might be Leicester, but it could be a different community. Was looking at buying a college that closed down and turning that into their high school campus. Which we don't have any high school
I was gonna
college
say.
campuses in the Milford community, but I thought that was a really kind of interesting.
That's innovative.
Because they said we want kind of a campus feel. It's the college had just shuttered its doors like in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, and I don't know if it's gone through or not, but they were exploring
But
that as
that'd
a
be
possibility.
wonderful, Kevin, because you could put all the grades, or most of them, all in one central area.
Yeah, yeah. So that was kind of a neat thing that like a solution that you just don't often hear.
No, but I kid about Nebraska, but if we did put it up in Asylum Street,
Yeah.
what does that do to Jim's bus schedule?
Well, I mean, we're running at the minute, and so
Yeah.
if there's
Add
construction,
15 minutes to each trip, and then you say Route 140.
right.
What are you going to do, cut through Bowden Street?
Well, particularly at different points of the year when those areas are very, very congested.
So, I'll go out on a limb, just like when I laughed and said, you're not going to renovate Woodland, you're going to build. You're going to renovate the high school.
I would say that's probably more likely, but obviously, as part of the process, we
Got to
need
do the due diligence.
Exactly.
But this old man's vote says, I like the idea of creating a new wing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a single decker, or Jonathan Bruce has talked about, if you're doing it, do a double decker.
Mm-hmm.
Because that would give you some extra geography. That one thing we haven't added in 40 years is any new geography.
Right, right.
The building is the building.
And we have that space where the courtyard is that you might be able to swing something there to start out a project, kind of on the side of the football field.
That would be nice, because we've talked about for 30 years that we're going to use that court. I think the last person that used it made it a vegetable garden.
Well, we're lucky we had it last year because we used it for lunches with COVID-19.
Oh,
So we were able to have a lot of the students eat outside, and it actually worked out very well. And we're probably going to continue that this year. So it's been actually good the last 2 years. We've probably used it more in the last 2 years than the first 7 years I've been in Milford.
but if you put up a double decker there, that would give you some room.
That would give us flex space for sure. For sure, 100%.
And then let's not forget our athletes. I get absolutely envious when I go to some of these schools when we were going for cheerleading and all these competitions, and you see towns with field houses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not taking anything away from Pete. God bless him. As an AD, I think he's fantastic. But it's like, okay, we're going to make you run and put together a fast program for Milford High. Oh, but carry this sandbag.
Right.
Carry that sandbag.
Right. Right.
And somehow he just keeps smiling and keeps the right attitude.
So our outside facilities, I'd say, are second to none right now. It's you know, our you know, gym and you know, I think they've done a great job again. And I give, you know, Rob Quinn, Josh Otlin, the principal, and Peter Boucher, like they're maximizing the use of our facilities right now. They've created different spaces for weight training and, you know, wrestling rooms and cheer rooms and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, a field house would be phenomenal.
Well, you know, we scrimp, as you know. We put pressure on all the department heads. The school, being 62% of our money, gets the biggest pressure every year. So that when it comes down to that one unique time, you know, I'm very, very proud that we built Woodland without using profanity. We didn't do a debt exclusion. We didn't do a 2.5 override.
Which is really unheard of today. I mean, that's very unique, and I think it's a credit to the financial planning, you know, of, I think, everybody who's involved in that, you know, whether it's, you know, the finance committee, the selectmen.
Well, but look at the department heads. You know, everybody either blames or thanks the finance committee, the finance director, town meeting. And yeah, we have a little bit to do with it. But when you really think about it, it's our department heads. You know, it's the people who really control it. Because if they're not controlling the money, I can moan and groan all I want.
Right.
It is what it is.
And I'll say, you know, you see a lot of towns, and it's almost like Game of Thrones. Everybody's like, you know, fighting each other's fiefdom. And I got to say, like, I've had, since I've been here, a tremendous relationship with, whether it's the police department, the fire department, the board of health, every town, you know, every town department, highway department. I mean, you know, I work very close with those guys in the wintertime, in particular, around snow days and snow removal. And everybody is just phenomenal to work with. And I hear horror stories from other superintendents in other towns that say, I'm fighting with the police chief. You know, the plow guys don't show up when I ask them to show up. And I never have those issues. And even when we have a minor issue, we're always able to work it out, because I think people just have that spirit of collaboration and cooperation.
Well, when we built Woodland, we're going to need 32 new people to do those fancy flowers you put in. Well, we didn't have
You're
the
not
money.
talking about the meadow mix, are you?
I don't know what it is. It was these little flowers that needed tending that we need 500 new people to hand pick each one. We went through it, and of course, as a finance committee member, I have to beat my chest and say, we're broke. We have no money. We're destitute.
Right.
Right? And the school committee's coming saying, we need $9 billion increase. But somehow, we came up with a little. We came down with a little. The weeds are there. They're pretty. And the school's being maintained.
Yeah, and the grounds there have looked fantastic from the day, you know.
Yeah, I call them weeds,
opened
but
the
I mean, the
building.
flowers are there.
Yep.
They give the right image. You know, the school itself, you know, for years we heard school choice is killing us because people start opting out when the kids are in 3rd grade. And once you lose them,
They don't come back.
now all of a sudden, I would think it's an attraction.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably part of the reason our numbers are going up too, because we're just seeing, like, you know, we're seeing upgrades in programs as well as facilities.
How is school choice looking?
You know, it's difficult to say. I'll have to come back and give you that answer, because our overall enrollment, I think, again, is going to be up. We were closing the gap in school choice. Last year was like just a weird
Well,
year.
Last
So
year you
it's-
can't count
it's,
for
It's hard to say,
anything.
but I would say, like, our school choice numbers, I think we're getting a little better overall. And again, I don't have them right at my fingertips. Where we're seeing a little more competition is from charter schools. We're seeing, more so than school choice over the last few years, we're seeing more Milford students pick some of the charter schools that are in the
But isn't
area.
that school choice?
It's a little different. Like school choice is like going into another public school, where charter school is. I think from a finance committee perspective, you see it as the same kind of
To
thing.
me, it feels the same.
Yeah.
I'm losing, X dollars per kid every time somebody leaves.
Yeah, and I think you could make that argument that it's a similar thing. But I think where we're seeing more outgrowth is from charter schools as opposed to school choice, and some of that I think is because like the last couple of years with COVID, I think more districts, like we've shuttered our doors for school choice because of just the number of students we're seeing just coming into the district.
And it's funny because we talk about the money.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to admit. The money doesn't bother me as much as losing Milford kids.
No, and I always take that personally when
Yeah.
someone makes a choice other than Milford, because I think what we really offer is, I think, first-rate programs, a wonderfully diverse community, and like kids at Milford High School can take, I think it's 5 different languages. Most schools offer 1 or 2. We have French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian.
I remember we went up to the Fay School
Mm-hmm.
when my daughter was deciding where she's going for first grade. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, they were spending twice as much per kid as Milford.
Mm-hmm.
The facilities were first rate. Everything was what you'd want. They let us meet some of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Polished speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely wonderful. Until I asked one of the girls a question that threw me totally off the ledge. I said, how much interaction do you have with kids in Holliston, where you come from? She said, well, we never interact with kids outside the school.
Yeah.
And I sat there and I said, Milford's not perfect,
And no place is.
but I love the fact I'm from here.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact I can go down to the town hall and see people that I graduated with or that had family that I knew. It gives me deep roots from a place I'm proud of. And the idea of being in a place where you don't interact with anybody from your hometown.
It's hard to replicate that sense of community you get by going to public school. Like, we have, every team does Friday night spaghetti dinners or some kind, and the music program goes on a couple trips every year. You see the kids everywhere doing all kinds of kind of unique things. We had 2 ice cream socials at Stacy Middle School today for the new incoming 6th graders. And you just get a real sense of community and home here. And you were talking about taking it personally if somebody chooses, regardless of what the choice is, whether it's private school,
Right.
or charter school, or another public school, is because what we offer here, I think, is so incredible. And again, I agree with you. It's not perfect, and we have parents who I could put a teacher out, and 10 people would say I love that teacher, and another person
10 will
would
say I don't.
Yeah, and that's more personal preference. But I would say I'd put our teachers against anybody. But I think that. I think you're right. That sense of community, that sense of almost family, because we also have so many people who work in the Milford Public Schools who also live in Milford.
Right.
So there's such incredible ownership within the schools.
Well, Jose Vieira was the one that convinced me, because we asked him,
Mm-hmm.
what do I have to do to assure my daughter gets a great education? And he looked at me without blinking and says, get involved.
100%.
And I was like, what do you mean get involved? He says, get involved, become part of the, the parent-teacher council?
Yeah, PTOs or school council.
Yeah, well, the PTO was more PTO-ish.
Yeah, but every school has a school council where we have a
The
group
school
of folks.
council
Yeah.
dealt with, and I got to know the principal, the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the PTO, but that was more the parents.
Right.
That's what I mean. It was PTO-ish. They really did stuff for the school, but it was the parents.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know who's going to be teaching my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
What's the philosophy of the principal? And being involved, I was on 4 of them before I was banished. When I became a member of the FinCom, they said you got to give up your seat on all 4 because you can't be a member of a department you're funding.
Right, and that makes sense.
Yeah, it did, and luckily the girls were in high school by then, so it was okay.
Yeah.
But it amazes me. It's so easy to rag on the Milford school system. But I've said it, and I'll say it again. I don't care what the opinion of the school committee is. They're not judging my daughters. The colleges were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Josh Otland, I judge you by how many kids you give the opportunity to go to the colleges they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like him, he's a nice guy, but at the end of the day, his report card in my mind was that my daughter got in every school she applied to. What more could I ask from the school system?
And I can tell you, we have kids going to the most selective and competitive schools in the country and in the world. And, you know, and I give credit to, again, our educators, because I think they do such a nice job of preparing our students for that next step.
Well, you know, it's funny because the Milford Physicians Group used to be run by Phil Sermicoli.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know Phil well.
And he told me point blank that he is totally biased towards Milford people, because when he hired docs
Mm-hmm.
who were from Milford or had ties to Milford, they tended to stay,
Mm-hmm.
and they had as much commitment as anybody, but they had more to staying in Milford. And I think that's the same that you have with your teachers.
Absolutely. Usually when I'm talking to a teacher and they're talking to me passionately about some issue they care about, they're also talking as a parent. So it's not just like, hey, this is what I want for, me as a teacher. They're also saying, this is what I want for my son or my daughter. And you don't get that everywhere.
And they stay.
They do.
And they stay, because when you start looking at, I remember when Lexi went to high school and took biology,
Mm-hmm.
Francis Jablonski was still there, right? And I just laughed,
Mm-hmm.
because we went to parent-teachers night,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember looking at him saying, now, do you still grade unfairly? And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean? I said, you never graded us fairly. You would never give it. There were two of us in the class who were always fighting for 100.
Yeah.
I said, you always found something to take a point or two off just to annoy us. And he laughed and he said, yeah, I still do that. Because if I can get you to not settle for a 98, to fight for the 100, I've won.
Mm-hmm.
And it really hit me to say, wow, that's the kind of guy, woman, man, whatever, the kind of teacher that we ought to replicate if we could.
And we have, like, our educators come back all the time. Like, they'll serve as substitute teachers. We had Andy Anderson serve as a dean of students over at Woodland the last couple of years. And, he knew sometimes multiple generations of a particular family.
So you got Andy out of Memorial?
We did.
I was going to say, I didn't think he'd
did.
ever leave Memorial.
We did. But yeah, I mean, it's, and we have so many folks. I look at the longevity of, our administrative team. And we've had, look at Craig Consigli. He's been in the district for probably more than 20 years. He started as a health teacher, and now he's the assistant superintendent. You look at Lucy Jenkins, who was at the preschool and now is leading our special ed
Craig
department.
was there after Tommy Davern.
He was, yeah. Yeah, he was running east for a little while.
Yeah.
And then he moved down to Woodland.
Because I remember Tommy was amazing. You never saw a person who took so personally, this is my building, and you're entrusting me with your children, and you could just feel that this guy's dedicated.
100%. And I'll still see him every once in a while, and it's great to he'll share a story or, but again, like, we have so many of our administrators who have just connections and ties and roots in the community. Josh Otland was a Milford High School graduate who came back. Tim Kiernan,
During the election, we were doing shoots for Milford TV down
Mm-hmm.
at the senior center as people were voting. And this beautiful woman walked up to me and says, I bet you don't remember me. Mrs. Davern, my kindergarten teacher. I couldn't believe it. She was as beautiful as she was when I went to school for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And she was my savior, because my mother put me at St. Mary's.
Mm-hmm.
I lasted 2 hours. She found
Did
me.
you just make it home for lunch?
Recess. As soon as
Okay.
they let me at recess, I took off like a banshee. My mother got home and said, what are you doing here? I said, Mom, the nun took a 2x4, this big ruler, and she whacked the girl next to me for talking. I'm going to be dead. If she's going to get hit for talking, I'm going to be dead. So the next day she took me up to West Street School, and there was Mrs. Davern, the most wonderful teacher I'd ever had. It was just so funny. Here we are, 50 years later, 50-some years later. She still remembered. It shows you the commitment.
100%.
I mean, Anne-Marie Longo tortured me when I got back. And she said, do you remember 35 years ago? She was my French teacher. When you asked me, why am I learning French? I'll never use it. I said, no, I don't remember saying that. She goes, well, you did. Where did you just move from? I said, Paris. But it just amazed me that she remembered. That's how much they care.
Well, there's a real passion, and I would even say, I think where a lot of communities had challenges, last year, and we had some challenges too. I mean, everybody did. But I gotta say, our teachers consistently stepped up. They were delivering meals to families that couldn't get out during the pandemic. We had so many teachers just going above and beyond pretty consistently, and it makes me proud to be part of, I think something so special.
So now we're really close to starting school.
Right.
I'm a parent of a student, one of the 4,500, and I ask you, what should I be doing? What would you tell me?
Well, I think, this year is going to be much closer to normal than the past, I think, year and change. The big challenge this year for us is going to be, yesterday the state, actually this morning, the state voted to mandate masks across the Commonwealth for public schools. And one thing I would say, particularly with the younger students, is just have them practice wearing a mask. And most kids have already done that, but I would say just have them do that a little bit. Our kids did incredibly well with it. We thought it was going to be a bigger issue than it was, and we had very, very, very minor issues with it. I would say, build up their enthusiasm and excitement for the, first couple weeks of school, because it really is a magical time. They're meeting their teachers, they're meeting their classmates, they're getting involved in, our athletic teams are out practicing now. We're going to be pretty close to normal this year, and I hope that continues, because I think we worked really hard to get as close as we could last year, but I think, the music programs are going to be fully back. The plays and performances are going to be back. So whether you're an artist, an athlete, into academics, I think the programs are going to feel very similar. And I think, the only thing we're going to really ask people to do is wear masks while they're in the buildings.
You talk about the kids adapted. Isn't that always the case with most things that
the kids always do better than us?
I was going to say, I was a bigger problem than my daughter because I would worry and, just be hypersensitive, and she'd look and say, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think the kids were great last year, and they shifted and adapted with, most of the changes, and they've been pretty resilient. And my hope is that particularly this class that's heading into their third year at the high school of kind of COVID situations, that hopefully by the time they're seniors, we're kind of through the pandemic.
Yeah, I felt bad when you started looking at some of these high school kids who didn't have a real prom, didn't have a real senior week, or
But again, we did the car parades. People adapted and did different things. But you do, there's a loss that, you and I, we go to work, and next year we go to work. When you're a freshman once, you're a sophomore once, and you have that experience one time in your life.
The community rallied, because when my grandson had his birthday, all these cars and firemen and
it's nice.
firefighters came around beeping their horns. It showed you what Milford is all about.
And we saw, you just did things a little differently. And I think this year we're going to be a little closer to more of a typical year. I think inside we're going to be wearing masks at least to start, and maybe for a while. But, our sports teams are, I think, there's throw-ins again in soccer. There's, full teams for field hockey. Football is going to be played in the fall. We don't have to clear off the field for
I miss those football games. We used to be up in the top corner of the bleachers. We used to call it this is the area for the fathers who aren't watching the game, but want the best view of where their daughters and sons. what they're doing down there, because we could see the whole field,
Right.
all around.
Right. So I think we're going to see more of that back, where you don't just have one or two guests. We're going to have, fans back outside, and there may, come the winter time, there may be some restrictions on how many fans we can bring into games, but I'm hopeful that it goes back to normal.
Oh, that'd be good. Any big change you see? Anything we had to curtail?
Not for this year. Dances are going to be interesting to see how that plays out, because we have proms and things like that, and we were able to offer some experiences for the students last year, but it wasn't like the traditional. We did it outside at the end of the year for I think our seniors. We put up a big tent. I think we're trying to figure out ways, whenever there's an obstacle, to how can we make this again as close to normal, or as to resemble normal.
God bless you, trying to keep social distancing. It's like floodwaters, trying to direct the floodwaters.
Well, kids are just like magnets.
I mean, at the end of the day, they're kids.
Yeah.
And they're going to do silly things. They're going to rub up against each other and smush.
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
We never did that.
No.
We were always perfect angels. We would never think of holding hands or anything.
But again, different reasons at different ages. But the kids did great. They really did, and they sometimes you had to remind them, but they were great about it, because they were just happy to be in school.
They're just
particularly
happy
the way
to
the
be
year
kids.
started. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes when I see what some of these parents focus in on, you sit there and say, there's obviously limits.
Mm-hmm.
My job as a parent was always to set the limits. My daughter's job seemed to be to push the limits. But at the end of the day, I'm really proud of the kids that come out of Milford.
Absolutely.
And the educational opportunities. And like I say, Josh, you're principal of the high school. Your report card is how many opportunities did you make for the kids?
And I would say he and his team have done an incredible job. Not, I
Yeah.
think across the board. They've been adding programming just about every year, shifting programming to kind of meet the changing needs that we're starting to see.
Whether you believe what he's doing is right or wrong, you look at the report card, and when you can pick top schools, and the schools say, I'll take Milford grads,
The pathway is there.
that's all you can ask.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect Josh to raise my kids. That is still my job. I can't delegate that. But I expect him to educate them. And he seems to be doing, and his staff, a really good job. Well, as we come to the end, people ask, will I get a good education for my child if I send him to the Milford school system? Judge for yourself. Get involved. I can tell you that I couldn't have asked for better for my children, and I know a lot of friends who have sent their kids to Ivy League schools, to top-level schools, and even to schools that don't necessarily carry the reputation, of an Ivy League school. But you look at UMass Amherst, you get as good of an education there as anywhere. You look at the state system, you get a great education. And again, I joke about our principals, but my scorecard is how well my kids did. All 4,500 of them. Not all of them have the same opportunity. But as long as they're getting the maximum chance that their abilities allow, we can't ask for better. And if you have questions, call the high school office. Call the principal's office at whatever school. I've never seen any parent turned away. So, as always, thanks for joining. We'll see how it turns out in 3 months. And may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than tonight. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Al, for having me.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life